The psychology of horror films. Starting with the physiological reactions of fear and anxiety, when exposed to a frightening stimulus, a series of reactions is triggered within the body in order to adapt to its environment. According to Tricia Hassan, a chain reaction ensues, beginning with the brain. Different parts of the brain are involved in this autonomic process, including the amygdala, the thalamus, the hippocampus, and the hypothalamus. The amygdala identifies potential threats as well as processes and interprets emotions. The thalamus acts as a relay switch between brain hemispheres. The hippocampus retrieves memory of past experiences to give context, and the hypothalamus is a command center. It activates fight or flight via a neural response. According to Thierry Steimer, during the fear or anxiety response, external auditory, visual, olfactory, or somatosensory stimuli are relayed by the thalamus to the amygdala and cortex. The central nucleus of the amygdala directly activates various midbrain regions or nuclei responsible for different aspects of the fear or anxiety response, including freezing or escape, increased rate of breathing, startle, or increase in heart rate and blood pressure. The prefrontal cortex processes more complex information. It regulates the physiological, neuroendocrine, and behavioral responses. According to Harvard Health Publishing, the hypothalamus communicates with the rest of the body through the autonomic nervous system, which controls our internal organs and glands and is considered to be outside the domain of voluntary control. The autonomic nervous system can be further subdivided into the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. After the sympathetic nervous system is activated by the hypothalamus, signals are sent to the adrenal glands. The glands respond by releasing epinephrine, otherwise known as adrenaline, into the bloodstream, triggering multiple changes. The heart pumps faster in order to send blood to the muscles, heart, and other vital organs. The rate of breathing increases while small airways in the lungs open wide so the lungs can take in more oxygen. The sensory systems become more receptive, and epinephrine triggers the release of glucose that is stored in the liver, supplying energy to the body. On to the appeal of horror. Glenn D. Walters, Ph.D., defines horror as a fictional product designed to evoke terror through the implied presence of supernatural or grossly abnormal forces. Walter argues that there are three features of horror that contribute to its popularity: tension, relevance, and unrealism. Starting with tension, horror films create tension to appeal to an audience's need for emotional stimulation. Audience appeal is created through the building and relieving of tension. There is the anticipation of the build, exhilaration as the action ensues, and the catharsis of the resolution. The viewer craves the inducing and relieving of tension, thus enhancing the appeal of horror films. To create tension, directors introduce elements of mystery, suspense, gore, terror, and shock into their films. Relevance. According to David Ines, the horror industry relies on our ability to identify with the characters and situations within the films. The emotional connections that are built during a film determines its success. The relatability may be derived from personal experiences, or it may be derived from the film challenging a familiar or commonplace societal norm. For example, the film Saw. Its popularity can be attributed to the universally present debate about the morality of torture. That's why the series is so popular. Relevance can be achieved through the audience identifying with the victim of the film. The victim's struggle and attempts to overcome horrific circumstances is easily relatable to common people with everyday challenges. Emotional parallels may be drawn between the audience and the focus of the film. Audience members, after reflection upon their movie-going experience, gain heightened awareness through this unobtrusive experience. In the horror genre, films that are hard to distinguish from reality are typically avoided by audiences. Images that are simultaneously disturbing and real are repulsive to most normal individuals. When an audience is aware that scenes of extreme violence or gore are fictional, it creates a safe psychological distance for audiences and allows them to indulge in their morbid curiosity and fascination in a socially acceptable, comparatively healthy way. The simulation of a threatening environment allows audience members to confront their fears without the potential for real harm. Manipulation of the setting, cartoonish and over-the-top gore, use of different lighting techniques, and use of soundtrack allow horror films to be recognizable as separate from reality. And there are a few incomplete theories on our attraction to horror films. According to Park, philosophers, psychoanalysts, and psychologists alike have advanced theories to explain the allure of horror. Starting with the psychoanalytic theory, Sigmund Freud proposed that horror is a manifestation of the subconscious fears, desires, and urges that reside within the id. Carl Jung believed that horror taps into the collective subconscious and plays upon familiar paradigms. Onto the catharsis theory. Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, believed individuals were attracted to scary movies and dramatic plays in order to relieve negative emotions and aggression, a process called catharsis. Excitation transfer. Dr. Dolph Zillman posited that the negative feelings felt by a viewer during the frightening parts of a film heighten the positive feelings when the protagonist succeeds. Lastly, sensation seeking. Marvin Zuckerman proposed that individuals who scored high on the sensation-seeking scale created by Zuckerman himself partook in more thrill-seeking activities, including watching horror films. On to the fear tactics of horror. The first horror film having been released in 1896, the genre has been around for nearly as long as the industry. Although there is variability from film to film, all have the same intent: to scare. Popular subgenres of horror include psychological, paranormal, zombie, slasher, disaster, and monster horror. As years have passed, the films have adapted to increasingly desensitize audiences. In order to obtain the fear reaction and to draw large crowds, several techniques are utilized in the production of horror films, a few of which will be discussed in detail: strategic cinematography, good acting, shocking special effects, and timely music patterns. First, cinematography. Cinematographers utilize various camera techniques while filming in order to achieve different effects. Shot sizes. Close-ups are used for dramatic effect and communicate intense emotion. This scene is taken from Psycho, which was released in 1960. Medium shots give distance during repelling images while maintaining an engaged audience, and long shots establish setting and location of a certain scene and give a frame of reference to the viewer. This was taken from The Exorcist, a long shot which establishes where the movie will be taking place. Camera angles are another factor in cinematography. High or bird eye relates a sense of vulnerability. For example, this shot taken from The Shining in 1980. Low emphasizes the powerlessness of the victim, or indirectly, the audience, such as this shot taken from The Touch of Evil. And point of view allows the audience to experience the victim's emotions vicariously, which deepens terror. And this is taken from the Blair Witch Project from 1999. And lastly, camera motion. Handheld camera movement is characterized by suddenness and fast pace. The fear is directed towards a present danger, such as another character or thing. From Cloverfield, 2008. Tracking makes the character seem like he or she is being followed or watched, and it gives the audience a greater view of the scene and builds suspense. From Don't Breathe, 2016.
Okay, let's go. Let's go. This way. This way. Come on. This way. Come on. Come on. Come on. I see light.
Lastly, Steadicam. It uses fixed placement and smooth movement to instill terror. It may be used with detail shots to show important information and to maintain a steady pace throughout the scene. This is taken from the 1978 film Halloween, which is infamous for its use of Steadicam. It's one of the first uses of it. Next, acting. Quality acting is an important component to the success of a horror movie. Shocking special effects and an interesting plot can only bring a film so far. Brilliant performances are what sets movies apart as cult classics as opposed to fading into obscurity following initial popularity. Certain horror film directors will conceal certain details about a scene or provoke actors while off camera in order to obtain authentic reactions during their performances. Starting with The Shining is an excellent example of brilliant acting seen through the performances of Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. Stanley Kubrick, director of the film, reportedly mistreated Duvall constantly. He told the cast and crew members not to sympathize with her when she was upset, thus increasing her emotional distress, which translated into her performance as a woman on the brink of insanity. Jack Nicholson later credited her performance as the toughest job that any actor I've seen had, because 40% of that picture, she's hysterical. Here's an infamous shot from the scene. And this other one is also a very famous scene from the movie. It's reported that Stanley Kubrick made Shelley Duvall do the scene a reported 127 times, which is record-breaking for the time.
When do you think maybe he should be taken to a doctor?
As soon as possible. As soon as possible.
Another example of quality acting would be The Silence of the Lambs from 1991. For his performance as Dr. Hannibal Lecter in The Silence of the Lambs, Anthony Hopkins won the Oscar for Best Actor. Some of his lines were improvised or unscripted, generating honest performances from his fellow co-stars. His onstage presence as a powerful, almost omnipotent force resonates as he delivers a memorable performance as a charming psychopath.
The census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. You fly back to school now, little Starling.
Now into special effects. As time has passed and technology has advanced, developments have been made in the special effects dimension of the horror genre. Practical effects have not quite been rendered obsolete, yet CGI and digital compositing have been noticeably prevalent in the filmmaking process. Multiple films utilize practical effects, such as real actors and makeup, in concert with digital effects and simulations in order to achieve the desired results. One example of good use of special effects is An American Werewolf in London. In 1982, this film won the Academy Award for Best Makeup and Hairstyling. David Naughton, the man-turned-werewolf in the scene, spent 6 10-hour days in prosthetics for this unparalleled transformation scene.
I didn't mean to call you Meatloaf, Jack!
Now Alien. Alien, winning the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, makes use of stunning practical effects. Director Ridley Scott gave the cast little information about this otherworldly and gruesome sequence before rolling the camera and recording the famous chestburster scene. And lastly, It from 2017. The look of Pennywise, portrayed by Bill Skarsgård, was achieved through prosthetics and makeup effects. Even so, many of the terrifying scenes were not entirely left up to practical effects. For example, the refrigerator scene was accomplished through a wire rig which pulled and rotated Skarsgård's body, as well as through computer-generated animations. And lastly, music patterns. Professor Michael J. Epstein, who leads Northeastern University's Auditory Modeling and Processing Lab, identifies 4 main categories of music use in horror films to evoke physiological responses. First, dissonance and unnaturalness. Nonlinear sounds, a dissonant chord, a child's cry, a baby animal scream, trigger a biologically ingrained response. Musical clips in which melodies suddenly become higher provoke greater emotional stimulation. Dynamics of loudness, speed, and pitch. Sound dynamics in horror movie musical scores also create tension. When the volume fluctuates, the audience becomes unsettled and anxious. Uncertainty, anticipation, and whispers. The most innocent sounds from real life can be the most terrifying sounds in horror movies simply because of context. Children singing and whispering are common elements in horrors that cause apprehension. Other stress-inducing sounds used in movies can be actors' dialogue, ambient noise, or background music. Lastly, startle reflex. The startle reflex is utilized to make audiences jump. According to neuroscientist Seth Horowitz, a sudden loud noise activates a very specialized circuit from your ear to spinal neurons. It's the startle circuit. If you suddenly hear a loud noise, within 50 milliseconds, your body jumps and begins to release adrenaline, with no consciousness involved. The jump scare is a predictable scare tactic. It is consistently effective. On to the film analysis. For this film analysis, I chose Hereditary, which is personally one of the scariest movies that I have ever seen. In brief, Hereditary revolves around a family whose mentally ill matriarch has just passed away. After her death, strange events ensue. Annie, her daughter Charlie, and her son Peter begin to experience disturbing occurrences linked to dark secrets and disturbing trauma that has been attached to the family for generations. In terms of subgenre, this movie resembles most closely to psychological horror. It is very similar in style and tone to The Shining. Both are described as being a slow burn. Hereditary focuses on atmosphere and emotional horror. The film is able to deliver a persistent feeling of dread throughout the duration of the film, utilizing multiple techniques, including the ones previously discussed: cinematography, special effects, acting, and music patterns. When it comes to cinematography, the shot sizes it utilizes are close-up. This shot size is a vehicle for the most gut-wrenching scenes of the film. Through the tight shot, one can see the depth of anguish felt by the characters.
You tried to kill me.
I love you.
Why did you try to kill me?
I was trying to
Why
save
did you try to kill me?
Camera angles. The point of view angle allows for a vicarious experience of the character's emotions. The terror is palpable. Lastly, camera motions. The Steadicam instills fear and reveals important information about the crumbling dynamic of a family ravaged by tragedy. On to special effects. Hereditary makes use of minimal special effects when delivering its haunting and upsetting images. The film relies on subtlety and restraint, yet that also means that when gore is introduced, it's incredibly unnerving. This comes from the behind the scenes of the decapitated head, and this film clip happens towards the end of the movie. Next, acting. The horrific events that plague the family cut more deeply since the audience inevitably cares about the characters, which can be attributed to the mesmerizing performances by individuals such as Toni Collette and Alex Wolff. Toni Collette's performance is raw and heart-wrenching. Her progression to becoming absolutely unhinged is entirely uncontrived.
She's gone forever! And what a waste! If it could have maybe brought us together or something. If you could have just said, I'm sorry, or faced up to what happened, maybe then we could do something with this. But you can't take responsibility for anything. So now I can't accept. And I can't forgive. Because nobody admits anything they've done!
Alex Wolff's character demonstrates signs of regression, a concept we learn about in psychology, when faced with traumatic circumstances.
Stop! Mom, please stop! Mom, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry. Mommy.
And lastly, music patterns. Innocent sounds that build uncertainty and anticipation are utilized in this film. Charlie's tongue click is a noise that gains meaning as the film progresses. It evolves from an unusual tick to an indication of a sinister presence. Here it is at the beginning of the film.
That was your opinion, and you were...
And here it is at the end. During the film, an increase in loudness, speed, and pitch are used to build tension.
Charlie!
When it comes to soundtrack, Hereditary's signature ominous soundtrack subtly intensifies the sense of unease and dread. Lastly, startle. Although a less frequent occurrence since this film is anchored in emotional horror, jump scares are utilized. Now, with all this said, there are some proposed psychological benefits of watching horror films. Dr. Matthias Classen from Aarhus University in Denmark is a specialist in horror media and has spent 15 years studying the psychological effects of horror entertainment. Dr. Classen posits a few potential benefits related to watching horror films that fulfill a profound desire for an encounter with danger in a controlled environment. A greater threshold for fear-provoking or negative stimuli, a sense of control, regulation of the fear system, and improved coping mechanisms. Certain individuals with anxiety find horror films therapeutic. Viewers find the films gratifying since the negative emotions caused by the film are manageable. In Dr. Klassen's words, the genre allows us to voluntarily, and under controlled circumstances, get experience with negative emotion. In summation, the physiological and psychological processes behind the fear response are complex and not entirely understood. Reasons behind the horror's appeal are hypothesized, yet since the theories regard the human brain's internal processes, the theories cannot be substantiated. The topic is explored for professionals and enthusiasts nevertheless, and the horror film industry continues to be an established part of popular culture. Thank you so much for your time.